Good evening, everyone. My presentation is called You Are the Pride of Delmarva, and in it I'm going to be talking about famous blacks from the Delmarva Peninsula who made major contributions to the African American cause and their work with the Underground Railroad and their stories of escape on the Underground Railroad. So first I'm going to begin with slavery's beginnings on Delmarva. The African slave trade on the Delmarva Peninsula began around 1639. It was led by the Dutch West Indies Company. So it first started as a result of a trading expedition to the Caribbean. Two ships were involved, the Kalmar Nickel and the Griffin. They were sent in 1638, and their mission was led by Peter Minuit. During their stay, however, there was a bad hurricane that actually killed Minuit. The Griffin was able to escape the hurricane's effects, and it arrived back at the New Sweden colony, which is the Delaware portion of the Delmarva Peninsula today, with a black slave. His name was Anthony. From 1639 up until 1664, the Dutch used slave labor to establish their colony, and they began this by bringing African slaves up from their colonies in Brazil. A story of abuse, Lucretia Buchanan. Many historians and researchers have documented many stories of abuse that slaves have suffered at the hand of their masters on the Delmarva Peninsula. One such horrific story is that Lucretia P. Cannon, who was the leader of a gang of desperados who stole freed blacks and enslaved blacks from their homes on the Delmarva Peninsula and took them to slavery in the Deep South. So in a book that a person wrote about her horrible criminal activities, it was called The Narrative and Confessions of Lucretia P. Cannon. A story was told about a 5-year-old child who was screaming, and Lucretia got tired of hearing it scream, so she began beating it viciously, and that made the child scream even more. So eventually she ended up burning the child alive. So Dr. Samuel A. Cartwright. Despite the abuse that slaves suffered at the hands of their masters, medical doctors of the period like Samuel A. Cartwright just didn't believe these stories. They claimed that blacks favored slavery over freedom because it gave them more tranquility and sensual enjoyment. Cartwright asserted that as a result of his research of history and the Bible, he had concluded that Negroes were the descendants of Ham the Bible speaks about, and that they were supposed to be the servants of Japheth. And I think this is interesting, as historians and researchers are discovering today that the Negroes in America have a strong likelihood of actually being the descendants of Shem and not Ham. So when slaves ran away, Cartwright believed that they were sick with a disease called drapetomania, and that the overseer/master should whip them. He called it whipping the devil out of them. But these slaves were not sick with drapetomania. Maybe Dr. Samuel A. Cartwright. These slaves were sick with a disease called freedom. And these slaves were willing to do it and get their freedom by any means necessary. And one such way that they were able to get their freedom is by using the Underground Railroad. The most notable conductor of this railroad is Harriet Tubman. And we have stories of how at an early age she showed her resistance to the oppression that she experienced during slavery and stood up for justice, even during times when it cost her greatly. One such story was when she was about 5 years old, and she stole a sugar cube from her mistress's table. The mistress threatened to whip her, and Harriet Tubman ran away and actually hid out in a pig pen, eating scrap with the pigs, until she became so starved. In another instance, when Harriet Tubman was about 12 years old, she accompanied the plantation's cook to a store, and during that time a fugitive ran in, running away from his overseer, desperately searching for a place to hide. The overseer, however, was in hot pursuit and soon discovered his hiding place and proceeded to demand that Harriet help him tie up the fugitive. Harriet adamantly refused, and during that time, the fugitive took advantage of the overseer and was able to break from his grip and attempted to escape out the front door. The overseer was angry by this and grabbed a 2-pound iron weight and heaved it at the fugitive as he was running away. Harriet Tubman saw what he was about to do, planted herself between the fugitive and the overseer, and took the full blow of the iron weight And I thought this was very interesting because even at such a young age, she already displayed her strong sense of justice that she had and her desire to help others by putting herself in harm's way to help a fugitive escape. So, eventually she was able to escape herself, and she actually achieved her freedom on the Underground Railroad. A white farmer and his wife were able to help her escape through the Underground Railroad, as they were conductors themselves. And once she obtained her freedom, she desired that others also experience the amazing liberation that she felt. So she returned to the South again, and again and again and again, helping all those who knew that they were slaves. Tubman gave babies paregoric, which is actually a mixture of opium, to keep them asleep and quiet, so that they wouldn't give their the fugitives' hiding places away. And she kept a gun handy to deter the slaves from getting cold feet and turning back during their most frightful moments of escape. So these are some of the tricks that she was able to use so that she could effectively and truthfully say that she never lost a passenger. Frederick Douglass is another conductor on the Underground Railroad. Born in Talbot County, Maryland, he is a proud Eastern Shoreman. He escaped to freedom when he was about 20 years old by disguising himself as a sailor because he had a friend who had papers that could give him a sailor's protection. Okay, so he boarded a train in Philadelphia, and from there he traveled to New York, where he was introduced to David Ruggles, the secretary of the Vigilance Committee of the Underground Railroad. Douglass proceeded to diligently fight for justice for his fellow brothers of the Negro race by publishing an abolitionist newspaper called the North Star and working as an Underground Railroad conductor at one of the stops directly before the runaways would reach their destination in Canada. And one of the sayings that he stated I thought was very interesting is he said, "I prayed for freedom for..." So another thing that's interesting about Frederick Douglass was his words when he said, "I prayed for freedom for 20 years but received no answer until I prayed with my legs." And I thought this was interesting because it can apply to a lot of people today, that you can pray and pray and pray and say, "I trust God and I'm waiting for God to do something," but sometimes you have to actually put actions behind your words, because actions speak louder than words. Sometimes you have to go ahead and do something and say, "Okay, God, I trust you." And that's what Douglass did, and that's how he got his freedom. So there are also many miraculous stories of escape that intrigued me from the Delmarva Peninsula. One such story of escape happened in Odessa, Delaware. Mary Corbett was a conductor, and her husband was a conductor of the Underground Railroad, and her house was a safe house. So one day she heard a knock on the door. It was a fugitive named Sam who was running away from the sheriff, who was close behind him. Sam begged for help, and although Corbett recalled being scared to death, she quickly let him inside and told him that he could hide in a cabinet. Now, this cabinet was so small that no one would ever believe that a human would be able to fit into it. The sheriff and his men were in hot pursuit of Sam and soon were able to track him and saw that he arrived at Corbett's house, and they asked to search the house, and Mary had to agree. But much to both Mary's and Sam's relief, the men decided to not even search the cabinet. They decided that no man would be physically able to hide in such a small space. So Sam, thankfully, was able to continue his journey onward to the north, to his freedom, and Mary was able to escape punishment. So another story of escape. These people are actually called the Dover Eight, and Thomas Elliot and Leonard Hughes decided to escape on March 8th, 1857. They decided to run away from the Pritchett Meredith farm in Bucktown, Maryland. 6 others decided to join them on the run, including one woman. They received their guidance from Harriet Tubman. Elliot's and Hughes' master posted a $600 reward for their return, but the total reward for catching all 8 of the slaves was $3,000. Thomas Otwell, a free black living in Milford, who actually had Tubman's utmost respect as a fellow Underground Railroad operative, he decided to betray them because apparently the reward that he would get for catching all 8 slaves apparently was too much for him to turn away. So he decided to partner with the white man that he was actually renting his land from, named Hollis, and they decided to betray all the fugitives together. So Otwell led them in the dark of night to a Dover jail instead of the expected next railroad station. Henry Purdue, thankfully though, discovered that it was a setup when he noticed by the light of the moon that the windows to the building were actually barred. So the sheriff of the jailhouse, Sheriff Green, attempted to get his gun from his living quarters so that he could force the slaves into the holding cell. The slaves, already suspicious because Purdue already noticed the bars on the window, they followed him into the living quarters, and Purdue threw a shovelful of hot coals from the nearby fireplace all over the bedroom floor and bed before breaking the window with the fireplace poker, which allowed his friends to escape. He fought off the sheriff and Hollis single-handedly while his friends leapt out of the window that boasted a 12-foot drop. Finally, Purdue was able to push off the sheriff and leap out the window himself. The sheriff attempted to shoot, but thankfully his gun jammed. Purdue was the first of his comrades to make it to freedom, journeying 50 miles to make it to Thomas Garrett's home in Wilmington. And Thomas Garrett, in his later recalling of the experience, said that it is a wonder that they acted with so much coolness and discretion. One of the men told me he would have killed Otwell at once, had he not, though. If he did do it, he would have less chance of escape than if they committed no act of violence, which no doubt was the correct view. Freedom. Freedom is never given, it must be won. This is a statement made by civil rights activist A. Philip Randolph. And I think that this is something that all the people that I've just talked about did. They realized that freedom would never be given to them. They had to win it.